that on. Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to acknowledge Unionville High School for hosting this field hearing today. This is a wonderful venue, and we appreciate your hospitality. Second, I would like to thank Superintendent Dr. John Sandville, Principal Paula Massaneri, and Mr. Rich Hugg, the Director of Technology and Communications, along with their staff, for everything they have done to make this hearing possible. I would like to recognize Dr. John Sandville, Superintendent of Unionville Chadds Ford School District, for a few minutes at this time. Dr. Sandville.
Thank you, Chairman.
There we go. So it's in the
So that you're on the video conference.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman Pitts and other members of the committee, and I apologize for my back here. I welcome everyone to Unionville High School and the Unionville Chadds Ford School District. This is an honor and also something that we are quite thankful for. This provides an opportunity for our students who are in the back here from Mrs. Grillo's AP Government class to see democracy in action on a topic, an area that is near and dear to the hearts of the community of Unionville Chadds Ford. So with that, I thank you all very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chairman Pitts.
Thank you, Dr. Sandville. We have two non-committee members joining us today, Congressman Jim Gerlach and Congressman Pat Meehan. From the Health Subcommittee, we have Congressman Ed Whitfield, Chairman of the Energy and Power Subcommittee, and a very valuable leader on this and other issues in our committee. And we will also be joined by Congressman Mike Burgess, who is the Vice Chair of the Health Subcommittee, by video conference from Texas. Now, I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Today's hearing will look at the effects of drug use in horse racing, how it impacts the health and well-being of jockeys, and whether adequate rules and uniform enforcement exist to prevent doping in horse racing. In 2008, members of the Energy and Commerce Committee held a hearing on breeding, drugs, and breakdowns, the state of thoroughbred horse racing, and the welfare of the thoroughbred racehorse. At that time, we heard testimony and promises from industry groups and state racing commissions that reform was needed and would be forthcoming. According to a March 25, 2012 New York Times investigative article, quote, since 2009, records show trainers at United States tracks have been caught illegally drugging horses 3,800 times, a figure that vastly understates the problem because only a small percentage of horses are actually tested, end quote. Further, the New York Times found, quote, illegal doping, racing officials say, often occurs on private farms before horses are shipped to the track. Few states can legally test horses there, end quote. Questions arise now about whether or not such rampant drug use leads to more breakdowns and injuries in horses and jockeys, and if so, what should be done about it? We're here today in the heart of thoroughbred horse country in Pennsylvania, I might say in my district, the 16th Congressional District. Welcome to my district. To hear firsthand from thoroughbred owners, trainers, jockeys, veterinarians, and lab experts on whether the previously promised reforms by industry have had any desired effect. I've heard from horse owners who make sure their animals are 100% drug-free when they race and are really bothered by what they see other people doing. We will consider the need for a national set of uniform rules to prohibit the use of performance-enhancing drugs with a set of consequential penalties for violations. We can look at whether it is possible to create a uniform set of rules for drug use, perhaps zero tolerance, so that every state, every race, is conducted on a level playing field, which is fair to all competitors, similar to what we have in other professional sports. Horse racing, unlike all other professional sports, adheres to no national anti-doping policy. We have been racing horses in the United States for over 200 years, but the alarming number of breakdowns and increased drug use has been a fairly recent practice. Racing is an inherently dangerous sport. However, the increased incidences and severity of breakdowns, which has resulted in many serious jockey injuries, demands a closer look at the issue of drugs used in horse racing and how they contribute to unnecessary risk to the horse and rider. Despite promises and assurances, state and industry groups have been unable to come together to develop uniform rules. The fact remains that there is no single entity which has the authority to impose uniform rules on racing commissions, tracks, trainers, and owners. Congress may need to step in to offer a sound national framework to protect the horses, the riders, and the public. The Interstate Horse Racing Act of 1978 was enacted by Congress to allow simulcast rights for racetracks so that they could expand their wagering clients. Today, that business makes up a majority of racetrack businesses. My personal view is that casino gambling at racetracks is a dangerous and misguided way to increase the fan base and grow interest in the sport, but that is a subject for another day. I just have been given an article. It's a top of the page, front page, New York Times, yesterday's article on big purses, lame horses, and death, talking about this issue of casino gambling impact on the racehorse industry, and it's as you can see quite a long article, and I look forward to reading that. Since 1978, Congress has continued to address public concerns about the industry and its practices. Today's hearing is being held to look at the problems associated with drug use in horse racing. Horse doping, breakdowns, jockey crashes are most certainly a contributing factor to the waning public interest in this sport. On the first day of Derby Week, when public attention on this beautiful sport is at its peak, it is an opportune time to discuss how the industry can regain public confidence. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and at this time I yield back and recognize our Vice Chairman of the Health Subcommittee, Dr. Burgess, for 5 minutes by video conference in Texas. Dr. Burgess, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take the entire 5 minutes. I know our time is a little bit tight this morning. I just want to appreciate the fact that I was able to simulcast from Texas, because Texas is also horse country. And I also want to acknowledge the work of Chairman Whitfield when he was our subcommittee chairman on oversight and investigations several years ago, and had a number of hearings into the horse racing business. At that time, primarily concerned about the insurance that jockeys were provided, but a number of these issues came up as well. So certainly look forward to the testimony of our witnesses today. I want to thank the people in Pennsylvania for making this possible, and acknowledge the presence of my colleagues who are not on the committee. I welcome their presence today at today's hearing. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back to you at this time.
Chair, thanks to gentlemen. At this time, we will recognize our first panel. We have 4 experts on the racing industry on our first panel. Mr. Gary Stevens, a retired jockey. Yes. All right. Before we have the experts, let's give the other members a chance for opening statements. Mr. Whitfield, I'm sorry. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Pitts, and I would like to also say how glad we are to be in Chester County, Pennsylvania. I might say that if I'd known it was this beautiful, we would have come up a long time ago. We're also delighted to have students with us today, and we know that they're all involved in political science, so they may have some advice for us as we go along as well. And I know that we're very excited about our witnesses today, because we have some people with great experience in the horse racing industry. We have vets, we have others that I believe will well represent the entire industry on the issues that we're interested in. I might also say that the horse racing industry is a $40 billion industry. It has an impact on our national economy. It employs over 460,000 people directly, and indirectly provides jobs for about another 1.4 million people. The recent New York Times articles entitled Mangled Horses and Maimed Jockeys, as well as the one you mentioned today, Big Purses, Sore Horses, and Death, has once again reminded us of the what I call the dark side of racing in America. To quote from the first article, on average, 24 horses die each week on racetracks across America. Many are inexpensive horses with little regulatory protection. 23 horses broke down on a single day last year. That was the day of the Kentucky Derby. Now, they didn't all the breakdowns did not occur at Churchill Downs, but around the country that day, 23 horses went down. I was told that Finger Lakes last year, there was testimony that at Finger Lakes, 63 horses died on the track last year alone, Finger Lakes, New York. Now, some people dismiss the issue by saying, well, these are just animals. But while the horse is important, the jobs provided are certainly important, the economic impact is certainly important, but even more important than all of that, in my view, is the safety issue. And certainly nothing is more important than safety for those men and women who are jockeys out there riding these magnificent animals. And we really don't know what the injury count is. I can tell you one thing, Dr. Burgess and I did have a hearing a few years ago on the jockeys, and more than one jockey came in who was a quadriplegic from an accident on the track. And this is a controversial issue because anytime you talk about change, people and entities feel threatened, which is just a natural inclination. And there are groups very much opposed to the legislation that Tom Udall and some of us have introduced, H.R. 1773. The National Thoroughbred Racing Association doesn't really like that legislation. The Jockey Club is threatened by it. The Horsemen's Benevolent Protective Association, or some of the horsemen's group under the Interstate Horse Racing Act, don't like it. We know that the American Association of Equine Practitioners, particularly Dr. Scott Palmer, don't like it. We know that some of the tracks are concerned about this legislation. So it is an issue that's controversial, and we're very much aware of that as we move forward, because anytime you talk about change, people feel threatened by it. And many people say the federal government should not be involved in horse racing. It's a state issue. But the fact is the federal government is already involved in horse racing with the passage of the Interstate Horse Racing Act of 1978. The industry came to the U.S. Congress and asked for the authority for simulcasting. And the Congress gave that authority without any strings attached. And so the predicament that we find ourselves in today is that there is not one entity that has any authority over horse racing. There's not any uniform drug test rules. There's not any uniform lab. And unlike other countries around the world, the use of drugs is prevalent throughout the racing industry in America. Now, we know that therapeutic drugs are necessary, but performance-enhancing drugs is another issue. And when you have representatives of foreign countries come to America and say, we're not really interested in buying horses in America as much as we used to be because we're concerned about the drugs being used. And many people, Arthur Hancock, others, have said they're very much concerned about the weakening of the breed because the horses winning the races are the ones that are bred the most, and they may not be the genetically strong horse, then they win because of performance-enhancing drugs. So we're talking about the horse, yeah, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about weakening the breed, we're talking about the public perception of racing. We're talking about the danger to jockeys. And when I ask Jack Van Berg, who is a Hall of Fame trainer, about this issue. I said, would you describe the drug issue in horse racing today? This was about 3 years ago at a hearing. He said, the best way I can describe it is that it's chemical warfare out there. So I'm looking forward to our testimony today, Chairman Pitts, and I genuinely appreciate your having this hearing.
Chair thanks to the gentleman from Kentucky and notes that he is a national leader on this issue, and we really value your expertise and advice on this matter. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentleman, my colleague from Chester County, Mr. Gerlach, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Congressman Pitts, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today. I look forward to a very educational proceeding here. When I had an opportunity to take a look at a few of the preliminary materials that your office staff gave us, I was very wide open. My eyes were greatly opened by a lot of the information that's contained in there, and certainly what's happening today in the horse racing industry. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and we do not have any jurisdictional responsibility over this issue. So I wanted to come and be part of this hearing simply to be educated by what's happening and to understand better the purpose of your legislation. And I think this testimony is going to be very eye-opening, as I said, to me, and I'm sure to my colleague Congressman Meehan as well. And we appreciate very much the chance to be here to listen to the testimony, and hopefully at some point see your legislation move forward to the House floor after your work in committee. And I really applaud your leadership in holding this hearing and to highlight these issues once again to the American people and to the public for what's really going on day to day in the horse racing industry. So thanks so much for having me. I look forward to the testimony.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and now recognizes another colleague from Delaware County, a gentleman who was a prosecutor, district attorney, and then U.S. attorney, Mr. Pat Meehan, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for Mr. Whitfield as well, and for taking the time to have paid attention to this issue so significantly, and I think its importance. It's timely by virtue of the fact that the nation gears its eyes towards one of the great horse racing prizes towards the end of this week, but I think it's particularly timely because we once again open up the pages of the New York Times and see a front page story talking about the very real issues that are focused around the drug use in the industry, as my colleague Mr. Whitfield talked about, discussing it as a chemical warfare. I do serve on the Oversight Committee in Congress, but Mr. Chairman, you identified the issue as a background as a former prosecutor. My eyes are wide open as I look at this, but I have to tell you that as I read the stories in the New York Times, so much of the focus appropriately is on the health and welfare of these horses, the extent to which, in the eyes of many, they may be being abused in some ways in terms of the overutilization and inappropriate use of the drugs, but I think first and foremost about the welfare of human beings that are getting on the backs of those horses, the jockeys themselves, who are being put into a circumstance in which arguably one might suggest that there is an understanding prior to it on the part of somebody that inappropriately affects a horse, that they are putting a human being into an untenable circumstance. And I'm interested in listening more about it, but the prosecutor in me begins to question at what point in time does somebody become criminally liable for injuries that occur to another human being by virtue of the circumstances related to the inappropriate doping of a horse. These are very serious matters, and obviously one of the concerns we have is not to over-regulate, to over-involve government in areas, but we also have an obligation to protect. And I'm interested in hearing the testimony of this incredibly impressive panel of interested owners and participants in the industry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. We have two panels today, and now we'll go to the first panel. We have four experts on the racing industry: Mr. Gary Stevens, a retired jockey; Mr. Arthur Hancock, the owner of Stone Farm; Mrs. Gretchen Jackson, the owner of Lale Stable, and Mr. George Strawbridge, the owner of Augustine Stable. We're happy to have all of you with us today. We will not confine your opening remarks to 5 minutes. You may have the amount of time you need to present your testimony. Mr. Stevens, you're recognized first.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Pitts, for holding this hearing this morning. I doubt that I'll take the 5 minutes because I'm going to get straight to the point and just like everyone to know these are strictly my opinions based on my career and my experiences as a jockey for 27 years. Started out at a very small racetrack in Boise, Idaho, and was fortunate enough to graduate up to the so-called big leagues. And we all know that this is a dangerous sport for both horse and jockey. There is a danger factor, as there is in all sports. But this danger factor does not need to have drugs involved. It just makes it that much more dangerous. Rode a lot of different caliber of horses throughout my career, the good with the bad. And when I mean the bad, I mean the lower class horses. That doesn't mean that they're bad horses, just a different class of horses. And horses, like humans, have injuries. I realize there is a place for therapeutic drugs in training, but I do not believe there's a place for race day medications. If a horse needs medication to run on, whether it's Lasix, Butazolin, go on and on. I think Mr. McPeak's going to announce that there's 99 legal drugs out there in the United States right now, allowable. But anytime the drugs are involved, danger factor goes up. And where I'm going with this is, rode a lot of horses over the years that say they're 8 years old and they'd raced 45 times. Along with those races is going to come wear and tear, as there is with any athlete. And I would know a lot of these horses. I would ride them, some horses in some cases, for 2 years. And they were sort of like your old favorite car, where you knew every nook and cranny about those horses. Didn't have the prettiest way of going, but that's just the way they moved. And I didn't mind riding those kind that could feel it. One of the scary things is when one of these horses would be claimed, they would go to a different stable, and the first time I would climb on their back, they would jog off like Secretariat, and that's when it was scary. And those were the horses that 9 times out of 10, if one broke down, that was the one that broke down. And yes, a jockey does have the choice to ride these horses or ride for particular trainers. What a jockey does not have control of is if that particular horse is in the same race that you're in after you've told them that you don't want to ride it. And we're not just talking about the specific horse that may break down and the jockey who's on its back. You're talking about multiple horses and multiple jockeys, which may be affected by a horse breaking down and going down. I know that the industry, a lot of horsemen complained a couple years back when we were in the process of phasing out anabolic steroids. Well, we did it. The Jockey Club was key in getting that done, and I have full confidence that the Jockey Club will do what's right and sign on to this bill, and we will have federally mandated rules throughout the United States, instead of every state having different drug policies and different thresholds. It's black and white. My opinion, if there's no race day medication, you're going to solve a lot of problems. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Now recognizes Mr. Hancock.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding this hearing today and for your consideration of legislation to ban race day medications in horse racing. My name is Arthur Hancock, and my family's been breeding and racing horses since the 1870s. As a fourth-generation horseman, I'm here to try to guarantee that horse racing will be a viable sport for my children and grandchildren in the next generations. At one time, thoroughbred racing was the #1 spectator sport in America. It was held in high esteem by the general public, and there was excitement and anticipation all across America about who would win the Kentucky Derby or maybe even the Triple Crown. There was always a superstar to follow, like Seabiscuit, Man of War, or Secretariat, who raised the level of enthusiasm for the sport. Back then, in the 50s, horses averaged 45 lifetime starts in their careers. Now it's down to a lifetime average of 13. This is an astounding drop of 71%. And since genetics change every million years or so, according to Charles Darwin, what could be the cause of this drastic increase in the unsoundness of the thoroughbred racehorse? While the number of starts has drastically decreased, the rate of breakdowns and fatally injured horses has increased. Moreover, the rate of injured jockeys has increased along with a loss of public confidence for the sport. Given that the track surfaces are even safer today, we would naturally expect that our horses would have more lifetime starts and be sounder than their predecessors. So what is the difference today in our industry that didn't exist in the past? What could be the culprit that is undermining the soundness of our horses? The answer is clear. The increase of breakdowns and unsoundness parallels the spread of Lasix as a race day drug. Today, only 5% of all horses are bleeders, and yet almost 100% receive Lasix on race day. There is only one reason for this. Lasix is a powerful diuretic that allows a racehorse to shed 20 to 30 pounds at race time, thus making it a performance-enhancing drug. We weigh jockeys meticulously to see if there's a pound difference. And here, this drug allows them to lose 20 to 30 pounds. And we in the horse business say that a pound at a mile is a length. And so, you know, you're talking about several lengths. In addition to Lasix, nearly 100% of all racehorses run with butazolidine, ketaphen, or banamine, along with other, quote, therapeutic drugs in their systems. And by the way, the cost of Lasix on race day is around $100 million. Just Lasix alone for race day Lasix for a year. And that doesn't count the jugs and all the after medications that they receive after the races to make them more comfortable, which is fine. Sadly, the financial interest of those who administer drugs and the lure of enhancing performance have become the drivers of our industry. Recently, the Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Association took a poll, and 75% of the owners and breeders voted to stop race day drugging. The fans have also said they don't want it. According to the McKinsey report, 75% of the population regards racing as a sport in which drug use runs rampant, and we are also losing 4% of our fan base every single year. Without fans, we're all out of business. So if the owners don't want drugs and the fans don't want drugs, who does? Well, the veterinarians and the big drug companies want them. Why? Drugs are money, big money. The needle goes in, the money comes out. They make the money, and the industry and the breed are destroyed in the process. Fans leave, foreign buyers leave, owners leave. We become obsolete, a thing of the past, a once great, disgraced industry. With precipitous declines in both attendance and wagering at our tracks, compounded by plummeting bloodstock sales, it is apparent that thoroughbred racing is at a crossroads. The industry has suffered a loss of confidence and respect with its fan base and the general public. Countless reports of trainers being charged with doping their horses, coupled with the destruction of horses due to horrific injuries on the track, cast our sport as something other than beautiful and noble. Today, fans and casual observers who have historically supported our industry don't want to be associated with the abuse of animals and the widespread cheating by the use of performance-enhancing drugs. We should also remember abused horses equate to abused jockeys, injured jockeys, and maimed jockeys. Recently, the Kentucky Racing Commission tried to do away with race day drugs, but failed because of the fear that other states would not follow suit and that Kentucky would be driving a nail in its own coffin because horses would move to other states with more lenient drug rules. There is no uniformity in the 38 racing jurisdictions. People are at odds with one another. Recently, when some of us were critical of TOBA for not pushing ahead with drug reform, a very high-ranking member of the Jockey Club called me and accused us of shooting our own troops. All we were really trying to do is rally the troops to protect our horses, to protect our jockeys, and to protect the integrity of our sport. However, we cannot do this alone. It is my hope that the Jockey Club and other various industry organizations will get behind the Interstate Horse Racing Improvement Act. This is a strategy that will save our industry. In conclusion, why has the horse industry been talking about stopping race day medication for decades with few tangible remedies? The answer is because there were no remedies until now. That remedy is the amendment to the IHA called the IHIA, the Interstate Horse Racing Improvement Act. If anyone has a better or more workable plan, please present it. All we want to do is stop this. For years, all we've had is hot air and hope. Our industry's partnership with the federal government gave us simulcasting. Now let's guarantee that races being simulcast in the United States are run free of race day medication. Thank you for your consideration of this issue, which is so vitally important to our industry. We appreciate it.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair thanks the gentleman for his opening statement and now recognizes Mrs. Jackson for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Whitfield, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your interest in the important issue of medications, drugs, in horse racing. I am Gretchen Jackson. I'm a horse person. I've been on a horse as a small child, as a teenager, and as an old lady. I am passionate about the horse. I am the wife of Roy Jackson, and together we own Lale Stable. Roy grew up around horses, and his parents raced. We bought our first racehorse in 1975 and have been involved in their training, racing, and breeding ever since. This is 37 years in racing. When we got involved with the industry, it was absolutely, positively unheard of to have a 2-year-old on Lasix, and not the norm for an older horse. Today, it is the exact opposite. I also worked for various educational agencies and schools, having been trained to teach coping skills to young children with emotional problems. In one of the sessions involved playing a video of a drug-dependent society. It used to get a lot of laughs every time because of the silly mistakes people would make while under the influence. Well, now it's not a laughing matter. Drugs have insidiously penetrated into the world of horse racing, endangering both horse and rider. By endangering, I mean threatening their very lives. Helmets and vests are great protection, but not always. No leg wraps can save the racehorse who has been given performance-enhancing drugs instead of time off to heal. Racing demands speeds up to 40 miles an hour. This means only the fittest and soundest horses should be competing. Many horses use a vet to enable a less than sound horse to compete by giving the horse performance-enhancing drugs. Vets profit from this service, and trainers can do this because there is less than a handful of certified testing labs that are able to test accurately out of the 19 in operation. I understand that there are more drugs being used on horses that are not known, not detectable, than the ones that they can identify. Many tracks use less accurate testing labs to save money. Both horse and jockey face unknown danger under these conditions. Roy and I raced a wonderful homebred horse named Barbaro. He gave us goosebumps every time he raced. He ran his heart out in the Kentucky Derby to win by 6 lengths. What a thrill it was to be in the winner's circle with 3 of our 4 children and their families. Then going on from there to the Kentucky Derby Museum, where we received more accolades while the Derby was played over and over again on the oval ceiling. Our euphoria only lasted 2 weeks as Barbaro broke his sesamoid joint right in front of us, only 150 feet from the starting gate. We ran down onto the track to be with him. There's only one way to describe what it is like down there, standing by a seriously injured horse. It is heavy. The air is just filled with grief. That scenario is all too easy to recall, as it has been printed on my mind's eye and in my heart. These are not forgotten by the fans. Many never come back to the races. Drugs present in the racehorse have created havoc with the betting fan too. Just go to a betting parlor and listen to the disgruntled fans. They are trading the latest secrets, whether true or false, that concern trainers and their appeal to the bettor. Many are wary and do not bet. So many of these horses and jockeys could be safer if drugs were not a part of racing. It is one thing to use drugs therapeutically after the race. It's another thing to mask problems before the race. The way racing is going now, it's a no-win situation for everybody. For the horse, the jockey, the owner, the fan, and the industry. We need to regain the honesty, beauty, and the sport of racing. Allow the horse to be a horse. Horses are vulnerable. They have no say in where their birth takes place or any of the how their life plays out. They only have us. It is time we are the best us we can be before we lose our dying sport. I speak for a number of people who are either directly involved with horse racing or simply love watching the sport and believe that to preserve its future and to ensure the safety of the horse and jockeys, we must move forward to institute a ban on race day meds. Roy and I stand ready to help you deliberate on this most important matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to testify today.
The Chair thanks the gentlelady and now recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Strawbridge, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Pitts and members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing and inviting me to testify today. I am George Strawbridge. I breed and race thoroughbreds, and not only in America, but in Europe as well. It's quite extraordinary what has happened to thoroughbred racing in this country, where over 75% of the population regard racing as a sport in which drugs run rampant and have obviously a very negative perception of the sport. This year, in the front page feature in the New York Times, it described the horrors of racing as a result of extensive drug use. The article was quickly followed by a lead editorial in the same paper, which condemned, quote, the casual and continual mistreatment of vulnerable, over-medicated, and ultimately disposable athletes. The editorial described how horses were forced to run with debilitating ailments and concluded that horse racing was a disreputable sport. I honestly have never heard of another sport in the United States described as disreputable. These words, such as mistreatment and disreputable, are very powerful words, and as such, they will have a long life. How did we get in this deplorable situation? I think the first reason is that in this country there are no significant consequences for doping horses. This unfortunate fact contrasts with the attitude of all other major racing countries. Just this past year, a very well-known jumping trainer retired from training. Why? Because he received a 4-year suspension. 4-year suspension. Not a week suspension, not a 2-week suspension, but a 4-year suspension. And so he retired as a trainer. Why such a harsh, severe penalty? The BHA, which is the British Horse Racing Authority, a national organization that controls racing, wrote because they wanted to demonstrate to racing stakeholders that reckless disregard of equine welfare would not be tolerated. Why it's tolerated in this country, I'll leave up to your imagination. This punishment is in contrast to the slap on the wrist that our trainers get. Another consideration is that the use of drugs in the United States has absolutely no stigma or shame attached to them. In fact, people who use them are given racing's highest honors in the form of Eclipse Awards. Michael Gill, notorious owner, was given an Eclipse Award for being the leading owner of the year, or the owner of the year. During the same year, there were 3 trainer finalists for Trainer of the Year. We're all under suspension. Extraordinary. I asked Cornelius Ubo, who, by the way, was going to contribute to this gathering, but was talked out of it. At any rate, I asked him last year, he's the head chemist, by the way, from the University of Pennsylvania Laboratory, if we were winning the war on drugs, as some were suggesting. His answer was an emphatic no. He pointed out that we were not only losing, but losing badly. He said if they discovered a test for one drug, 2 new ones came on the scene. He also mentioned that trainers could easily order non-detectable drugs on the internet. He told me about a non-detectable drug called dermorphine, which was not 10 times more powerful than morphine, like the drug Dutro was caught using 2 falls ago, but 1,000 times. This is stronger than morphine, 1,000 times stronger than morphine. In short, it was a very, very discouraging conversation. So what is our hope for the future? In a word, our hope for the future is change. We must change, we can change, and the best news is that we have slightly started to change. Thank goodness for the Breeders' Cup gradually changing to drug-free racing. But we must do more. Luckily, we have excellent role models in the rest of the world. These role models adhere to zero drug tolerance. These countries have rising attendance, rising handle and rising prices for second-hand horses bought to race in Asia. In Great Britain, racing is the second most popular sport after soccer and is a national institution. In Australia, the running of the Melbourne Cup is a national holiday. In the rest of the world, racing has full fields and national recognition. And look at the horses these models have produced. See the stars, Frankel, Black Caviar, just to name a few. Also look at the Grade 1 turf races in the United States last year. They were all won by foreign horses. And in fact, in the Canadian International, foreign horses were the first 4 finishers. And that's all with their second string. Not even the Frankels and things like that. This is their second string. I know that emulating the successful model in the rest of the world will be a big start towards respecting the star of our sport. We need to stop treating the thoroughbred as a commodity. We need to show the public and our fans, such that there are, that we care and that we are a clean and legitimate sport. The thoroughbred never, and I repeat, never let you down. My hope is that we stop letting this noble animal down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. That concludes the opening statements. We'll now go to questioning and answers, and I ask the members to please comply with the 5-minute rule. I'll begin questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes for that purpose. First of all, Mr. Stevens, do you think, does the public know that horses are drugged and therefore conclude no level playing field exists in the horse racing industry?
Yes, that is my belief. Used to be when I would get on an airplane, red-eye flight to fly to New York, first question I was asked is, have you ever rode in the Kentucky Derby? And if it wasn't that, they would say, is it fixed? So I would go through my spiel of why it's not fixed. Now the question asks, don't they drug all those racehorses?
Are currently employed jockeys afraid to express their opinion on banning race day meds for fear some trainers or owners opposed to a ban will no longer employ them?
I'm going to just say that I believe that may be the case, but I cannot speak for these riders. But that's the appearance it gives me, yes.
One other question. Do racetrack vets regularly identify and scratch lame horses before the start of a race?
We hope so, but that's not always the case, sir.
Mr. Hancock, we've discussed many different conflicting and overlapping organizations and associations in the industry. In your view, are there particular groups that have been an impediment to reforming the sport?
Yes, sir. I think I'd like to preface this by saying I have a lot of friends who are veterinarians, and they're good people, but this culture has evolved over the years. I worked at the racetrack when I got out of college for a year in '66, and for a top trainer in the country. And the only time the veterinarian would come around the barn was if we had a temperature or a colic, or to check the horse on race day. And but yes, sir, I think that's the case.
In your opinion, why have there been no Triple Crown winners in the last, what, 9 years?
Oh, it's longer than that.
Longer than that?
Yeah. I believe that a horse gets Lasix, say he runs in a prep race before the Derby or before in a race before that, he gets Lasix. He gets it on Derby day. Every horse in the Derby runs on Lasix, as well as Banamine or Butazol and some of the others that Kenny McPeak will talk about, I think. But then, and they lose the 20 or 30 pounds, and it dehydrates them. It takes them a few days to recover. Then 2 weeks later, they go to the Preakness, they're running the Preakness with Lasix, and by the time the Belmont rolls around 3 weeks later, I just think it takes a lot out of them. I'm sure of that. And I believe that that's a big reason why we haven't had a Triple Crown winner. And if a sport doesn't have stars, you know, to follow, like I was talking about Secretariat and a lot of other horses, you lose your fans.
Thank you. Mrs. Jackson, are most owners not supporting the ban of race day medication?
I think so.
Why? Would you respond to that? Hold the mic.
Sorry. I believe so, just because Arthur has come out with a list, and you've got many, many owners that have signed up requesting trainers not to use race day meds, right?
Right. There are 411, I think, the last count, and of top they're owners, trainers, that have signed up to get rid of this.
I think there's a significant amount.
Thank you, Mr. Strawbridge. When you import horses from Europe, do you expect those horses to be put on Lasix because they're now racing in the U.S.?
Yes, that's what happens, and that's what happens.
Why the switch?
Because Lasix is a performance enhancer. It's not only a performance enhancer because of the loss of weight, but it's more a performance enhancer because it's like blood doping. As animal gets dehydrated, there's been 2 studies in 1998 at the University of Pennsylvania that definitely concluded that there was a performance enhancement as a result of using Lasix, and a more thorough one regarding 16,000 horses at the University of Chicago the next year, in which it conclusively proved that it was a performance enhancer, and the main reason it was is because it would delay the onslaught of fatigue and increase the oxygen that would be going to the muscles. So it is a performance enhancer. As my friend John Gosden says, who comes over here and wins a Breeders' Cup race with a great deal of regularity. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, and Aidan O'Brien, after a year of trying to race without Lasix and not winning a Breeders' Cup race, he has terrific horses, by the way, and said, no, I'm going to use Lasix on my horses, and they all seemed to win as a result of using Lasix.
Thank you. My time's expired, but I wanted to ask you, in your experience, what is America's current reputation in the European horse racing community?
It's absolutely dismal. You look at the American horses. We sent a champion over to Dubai. The odds in this country were, anywhere from 3 to 1, 5 to 1, and you go, you look at Betfair and the Europeans betting on American horses, and the odds were 25 to 1 to 50 to 1. They say, oh, they're coming over and running without drugs. So therefore, they're not as good and as effective, and so that's a fact. I can't sell an older horse to race in Hong Kong from this country. This is sort of the same breeding that I have selling over 7 horses to Hong Kong from Europe. It's because they're tainted if they run in this country.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and now recognizes the Vice Chairman of the Health Subcommittee, gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess, for 5 minutes. Questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strawbridge, if we can stay on that subject for just a moment, what happens when the converse of that situation occurs? You referenced a horse that has raced in the United States now going over to Dubai. Presumably performance enhancers are withdrawn and the horse is less capable. If an owner in Dubai or one of the European countries comes over here to race, are they then more likely to use performance enhancing methods in order that their horses can compete?
Well, they will only use what is permissible in this country, what is legal in this country, and since Lasix is legal, that's what they will give their horses, to race on. And I think it's been proven that first-time Lasix use is an enormous advantage. At least that's what the bettors seem to think, and that's what happens when they come and race in this country.
So if there's a horse that has been of considerable renown and repute in a in a foreign country, that horse coming over here with a more permissive treatment of the performance enhancing compounds is actually going to have an advantage over the horse that regularly is given a performance enhancing compound?
Well, I think he would. There was a very curious Group 1 race in Chicago last year, in which the Aga Khan came over, and he's adamantly opposed to any medication, and has fired trainers that have been caught with Butte or anything like that, and is running against a Coolmore horse who was first-time Lasix, and they had a terrific battle, but the Coolmore horse won because, at least the bettors thought, he was using Lasix for the first time. They finished first or second, a matter of a head difference.
I'll just have to admit to some naivete. I'm a physician by background. Of course, Lasix is a fairly common compound used in treatment, but I was not aware that it was a performance-enhancing compound, or the degree to which it is apparently used. How, for anyone on our panel, how is it administered? How is the Lasix actually given to the horse?
Who would like to respond? Mr. Stevens?
IV or intramuscular, either one, with a needle.
So if it's given intravenously, is that something that that a layperson can do, or does that require a professional to administer it?
It's illegal for a trainer to administer any medication on the racetrack intravenously, so a vet would have to do it. And in the state of New York, when Lasix is administered, it's administered by a New York State vet.
And it is legal to administer it before the race starts. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the idea. I believe it's 2 hours before, 3 hours, it's 4 hours before.
Now, you, Mr. Stevens, in your testimony, you said that you can sometimes tell, or maybe I misunderstood, maybe you can always tell if a horse has been exposed to a performance-enhancing medication. Did I get that correct?
Yes, you did, sir. And the reason for that, as I said, if you've got a truck, and I know this might be a bad comparison, but if you've got a car that's got a wobbly tire, but it's always wobbly, and it gets you to where you're going pretty good, and all of a sudden you get in that same car the next day, and it's smooth as silk, somebody's messed with it. I mean, they didn't just change overnight when they're 7, 8 years old. So, yes, that something has gone on.
A good and experienced rider can tell that something has changed. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And there are times that a rider will feel something, and the horse doesn't finish that well, or he gallops back sore after the race, and you may tell the trainer, hey, he didn't feel just right today, and all of a sudden you see the horse back in 2 weeks later, and it's got a different jockey on it. And you may go up, it's very common for a rider to go up to another jockey who is now riding that horse and say, hey, watch yourself, man, this horse didn't feel that good. And if it's a young rider, inexperienced, then he doesn't know what he's supposed to feel anyway.
Okay, and that's actually, I guess, where I was going with this. You have the ability to say, I'm not going to ride that horse, but you don't have an ability to identify that horse to someone in authority and say, this horse is behaving in a way that makes me uncomfortable riding, therefore I'd like someone to investigate? Or
Yeah.
is there nothing to investigate?
Yes, you can do that, and that's what I would advise, excuse me, to every jockey in the United States is if you ride a horse that you feel is unsound, or he pulls up unsound, a lot of times I would tell the state veterinarian at whatever jurisdiction I was riding under, hey, you guys need to take a look at this horse before he runs again. But that doesn't always happen. A lot of these jockeys, I believe, because it's so competitive, they are afraid to say anything to anyone. It's they turn their cheek, and it's not because they want to, but it's because they're afraid of their job, losing their job.
But then you, as a jockey, you could be put at risk by having an unsound horse in the pack that's running on that track, even though you're not the rider. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you have a horse in front of you, the horses are very tightly bunched when they race. They race in packs. They're herd animals, and if the lead horse goes down, more times than not, several horses fall.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony this morning. You know, Mr. Stevens, you're a Hall of Fame jockey, and Mr. Hancock, you and your family have been involved with many Derby winners and others, and Ms. Jackson, you also, and Mr. Strawbridge is one of the leading steeplechase as well as thoroughbred owners as well. What's wrong with just having a horse run on natural abilities without anything? What's the problem with that? I mean, it's my understanding that other jurisdictions around the world that on race day they're supposed to be free of medications. So what is wrong with a horse just running on natural ability, Mr. Stevens?
Nothing. I would prefer that, and I had the pleasure to enjoy that with my stays in Europe. Rode for what I consider two of the greatest trainers in the world, and Sir Michael Stout and Andre Fabre in France, and I had the pleasure to ride for Mr. Strawbridge with some of his horses in Europe. Rode for him here and in Europe, and I can tell you this, that I rode extensively in Hong Kong, Ireland, England, and France, amongst Germany, but I never had a horse break down in one of these foreign countries with me. I had some pull up bad after the race or take a misstep with me, but I never had a horse break down with me. And now that's an amazing stat right there. And it was pure, and it was a pleasure, because when I galloped down to the start, you felt what there was. I mean, and if a horse, if you knew he wasn't himself that day, if he felt different than he had in the morning workouts, you scratched him. You'd get him withdrawn. But it's a great feeling of confidence to know you were going down there on a horse that was feeling everything 100% of what their physical abilities were.
Mr. Hancock, do you have any comment on that?
Well, I think the rest of the world runs without it. And we're the rogue nation, basically. We're the only country. Okay. They do use some Lasix in South America, which they're getting rid of right now, I understand.
And Ms. Jackson, you said that at one time there was no Lasix or any other drugs in the U.S. Is that right?
I believe New York State was the last, I believe, to allow it. But I think it's a matter of time that people want their horse. It's money, and if they have to give them natural time to heal, that they don't want to take that time. They want to get the money.
Mr. Strawbridge, do you have any comment?
Well, absolutely it's possible, because as Arthur says, they run, without, drugs in the rest of the world. And there is, an enormous appreciation for the animal, the thoroughbred horse, in the rest of the world as there is in this country. And that is why it is such a shame. You know, the thoroughbred racehorse is God's noblest creature, is not running on their natural ability the way they are in the rest of the world, and that's why the negative perception is there.
Mr. Stevens, have you known any jockeys that suffered catastrophic injuries because of accidents on the track?
About every jockey I know. My brother was airlifted out of Canterbury Downs 2 summers ago. He was on a filly that he entered the stretch 4 lengths in front, and she broke both front legs simultaneously, and the horse landed on him. 4 other horses ran over the top of him, and he punctured both lungs, broke all of his ribs, broke his sternum and his pelvis in that fall, and hard pressed to think of any jockey that hasn't had a bad injury, and unfortunately neck injuries and back injuries seem to be a fairly common injury. We had 2 jockeys in a short period of time. Renee Douglas is a quadriplegic. Ibar Koa, thank God miraculously, he is walking now, but the list of paralyzed jockeys goes on and on and on.
Just one other question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Are painkillers regularly administered to these horses on race day, or is that illegal in most jurisdictions, or do you know?
I know that every state has a different time frame, but bute or banamine, they're 24 and 48 hours pre-race day. Lasix is the only legal drug that can be administered
But
on
Mr.
race
Strawbridge,
day.
you were talking about something like 100 times more powerful than morphine. Is that right?
Yeah, there was a drug 100 times more powerful than morphine, and dermorphine is 1,000 times more powerful than morphine. And for those of us that have had morphine to kill pain, that'll kill the pain.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Now recognizes the gentleman from Chester County, Mr. Gerlach, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you. Following up on that, any of the panelists, I'm trying to make sure I understand exactly, in talking about the performance-enhancing aspect of the drugs, I'm picking up there's 2 aspects here. One is the diuretic that allows for reduction in weight of the horse at race time, that I then assume is better so that the horse runs faster because the horse is of less weight and therefore can put in a faster time. But that LASIK is not used necessarily to mask an injury, is that correct? So the LASIK is used to reduce rate to create a faster time going around the track. Is that basically the purpose of the use of LASIK?
No, the purpose of the use of LASIK is to several purposes, but at any rate to lessen the chances that a horse will bleed. They think that by dehydrating the animal, he'll have a less chance of bleeding. But we know from statistics and past measurements that only 5% of the horses bleed. They all bleed to some extent, but when I talk about the 5%, that's sort of serious bleeding. And the thing to remember, Mr. Gerlach, is that LASIK is not allowed, you know, for humans to run on. I mean, when human athletes compete in track and field, their whole objective is to hydrate themselves because of the dangers of dehydration.
Right, right. And so the other drugs that you make mention of, those are to mask injury or to mask a condition of the horse that while it's still able to run, it's in a weakened condition or it's in a pained condition, and therefore that masks that for that horse in hopes that it gets around the track in a good time before some further injury occurs to it. Is that right?
Correct.
And so there's a patchwork of laws and regulations around the various states that dictate what you can and can't use on game day or race day.
Yes, and there's also numerous drugs, as Dr. Ubo was saying, that are non-detectable. So if they're non-detectable, they can be given without any detection or any consequences. And they definitely are performance enhancing because they cover up pain, such as morphine would, and they're muscle relaxers. They have agents of blood doping that to increase the oxygen supply to the muscles, and they're performance enhancing.
So, Mr. Stevens, when you line up then in the gate on race day, you don't know the other 7, 8, 9 horses if they have anything in their systems that are masking an injury that some trainer is taking a chance on won't reoccur or won't show up during the time of the race. You don't know that as a jockey at that point in time. So what's the situation in terms of your mindset? Why do jockeys, if they don't know the other horses may have certain enhancements given to them or something that's masking their injuries, what's the economic pressure that a jockey has to participate nonetheless in that race, not knowing the condition of the other horses?
Well, believe it or not, I think a lot of it is peer pressure. That hey, if one pilot won't fly the plane, we'll find a pilot that will fly the plane. There's, as I'd said before, there's always a danger factor in horse racing, and when I was active and riding consistently in California, that was the circuit that I was on. There were certain level races that I didn't ride because I knew that horses were changing hands a lot. In other words, they were claimed in claiming races, and there were certain trainers that I would not ride for, either because they either didn't know that they were running sore horses, or they didn't care, and maybe a combination of both. But it tended to be the same trainers that I suspected of doing things, and I chose not to ride. I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to run against a lot of their horses because they were lower class horses, and I chose not to ride those races because of the risk factor.
Thank you. Yield back.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Now recognize the gentleman from Delaware County, Mr. Meehan, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this very distinguished panel for your presentation here today. But I look at a very complex industry. I see 75% of the horse owners are looking at this and suggesting that we need to address the issues, and more than 75% of the fans. Yet we have horse owners, casino owners, the horse racing commissions, we have trainers, we have veterinarians, we have drug companies that are producing these, as testimony has been made today. We have the jockeys. We have fans who are feeling that they really can't trust an industry. With such a tradition and history that goes back to the days of my Latin studies, who's in charge? Mr. Strawbridge, who's really in charge?
Well, that's the problem, Mr. Meehan. There is nobody in charge. We have a bunch of alphabet organizations, and the result of their input and discussions and ideas is to produce, as the Bible said, the Tower of Babel. That's all we have in this industry. There is no spokesman, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. What everybody says, the only way things will change, things will reform, is if we have a national governing body, the way they have in England, the way they have in France, the way they have in Hong Kong, the way they have.
What's preventing that now?
The what?
What's preventing that now?
Oh, the Jockey Club. Arthur, you remember this. When was the Jockey Club told that they couldn't govern racing. They were because they were a private organization, and they don't have the authority. The authority has to come from the federal government to give a national organization the authority to make rules, enforce rules, and direct racing. That's what has to happen, because the states will. There was an example, the RCI, another alphabet organization, Racehorse Commissioners International. They wanted to have a compact, which made sense. They were going to set the rules and, require through this compact enforcement of the rules, but there was an opt-out provision, and all of a sudden, it wouldn't not only start, but
So if one state won't abide by the rules, it becomes
sure.
we have a race to the bottom,
Yeah,
not a race
sure.
to the finish line.
and there's a major differential in as far as punishments are concerned, or enforcement. And as Dr. Ubo said, that when I asked him, are you getting more and more positives? He said yes. And I said, well, where is the enforcement? He said, we can only identify the positives. The enforcement is up to this state racing commission.
May I explore that for a moment? Ms. Jackson, you discussed the idea of the various participants in this and your concern about drugs endangering jockeys, among others. It's counterintuitive to me. I think about a veterinarian as somebody, almost a physician, trained to take care of the welfare of a horse. How is it that we have veterinarians who are authorizing the utilization of these drugs into horses, where there has to be the recognition and the understanding that it cannot be in the best interest of a racing horse to be on these kinds of drugs prior to a race? At least the testimony clearly supports that.
I think, in my opinion, I think the veterinarians have become twisted in their belief that they're helping the horse, and they're helping the horse for 2 hours maybe, and they're not. They're very, very nearsighted. They're also receiving money for the injection, and if they tell the owner or the trainer that this horse needs time off, they don't receive any income. But they do receive an income from inoculation. And I think that I hope that they're in their mindset thinking they're helping the horse. I hope that that's where they're coming from, but it is so nearsighted.
Mr. Stevens, it's an honor to have you here today as along with this distinguished panel of owners, as a Hall of Fame jockey. But when you talk about your colleagues, the numerous who are not able to walk here today like you are, I mean, who do you hold responsible for putting the jockeys in the position that they are in, where, again, I go back to the words that were used, reckless disregard for the welfare of not only the animal, but by connection, the human who's riding it?
Well, at the end of the day, they have what they have in most jurisdictions that is the same in about every state. It's called the trainer's responsibility rule. In other words, whenever there is a bad test, and kind of getting back to your question, there's very rarely ever a penalty for a vet who actually, if there's a high bute or a high Lasix, it's the trainer who gets the slap on the wrist, very rarely a vet. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of trainers need to take a look in the mirror, and when they're complaining about racetrack condition, for instance, horse breaks down and immediately they blame the racetrack. They say, "Oh, the track was bad," and I'm out at the track watching horses train every single day, no matter which jurisdiction I'm in, and surprisingly, I mean, someone who's been in this game for as long as I have, you can visually see. Some don't always have to be on a horse's back to tell they're sore, and to see some horses go trot by in the morning or gallop by that you can see aren't that good the way they're traveling, and then to see them run in the afternoon. At the end of the day, it's the trainer that is calling the shot to send those horses out there on the racetrack.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired. I yield back.
Chair, thanks the gentlemen. That concludes the first round of questioning. I would like to have at least one follow-up. H.R. 1733 has been introduced in the House of Representatives by my colleague, Mr. Whitfield, and I hope in responding to the follow-up questioning by the gentleman from Kentucky, someone will speak as to your thoughts on that bill. At this point, Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, 5 minutes for follow-up.
Well, thank you. I think Mr. Meehan certainly hit the point here, and that is that no one really has authority to do much of anything. And I know after the Interstate Horse Racing Act was passed in 1978, Senator Mac Mathias of Maryland spoke to the Jockey Club because this issue had come up about prevalence of drugs on race day. And he asked the Jockey Club for the industry to take charge of this issue and do something about it. And he said, and if not, then we're going to try to do something at the federal level. And since then, about every 4 or 5 years, this issue comes up. And the Jockey Club, the National Thoroughbred Racing Association, all of them have the best intentions, but they really don't have any authority to punish. Is that your understanding, Mr. Hancock?
Yes, sir. Nobody is in charge. And because there's 38 states with their own racing commissions and governors, and
Right.
they're in charge of their own districts.
And it is a complicated issue because this Interstate Horse Racing Act was given to the racing industry at their request for simulcasting, and that's where about 80% of their revenues come. Now, you know, we focused on the thoroughbred today, but this act also would apply to quarter horse racing as well as standardbred racing. And from the New York Times article, I know a lot of that first article focused on quarter horse racing. I almost get the impression that quarter horse racing, it may be even more dangerous and less regulated than thoroughbred racing. Would you all agree with that or not? Or do you have any idea? Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. Do any of you have any idea on that?
I really don't know much about the quarter horse racing.
All right. But anyway, this legislation would apply to all of it across the board if they use simulcasting. I might also add, Mr. Chairman, that Tom Udall, who's a Democratic senator from New Mexico, introduced this legislation over on the Senate side. So they are trying to move over there with it as well. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Would one of you like to speak
Mr. Chair?
as to the legislation?
Mr. Chairman? Mr.
Yes,
Chairman?
the Vice Chairman recognized.
I wonder if I might just have one follow-up question with Ms. Jackson. As an owner, are you consulted before the use of any performance-enhancing medication? Do you have the power to veto the use of this medication, or are you just simply left out of the decision-making process?
I think we've stated it pretty clearly with the trainers that we use, and we've chosen the trainers because they have not a history of using those kind of drugs. We also receive monthly bills where we are allowed to see what has been injected in our horse, what the horses receive, so we have an opportunity to know what's going on. I understand that that trainers will inoculate horses on their own and pay for it, but I don't think we are associated with those kind of trainers. I think ours is a direct and very honest, good relationship with our trainers.
And you're to be commended for that, but does you have the ability to set that standard? I'm not a trainer, but an owner have the opportunity to set that standard with their crew prior to engaging in any of this activity?
I think that's a possibility, yeah.
I mean, you are the owner after all, correct? And
Right.
And
Can
Okay.
you repeat that
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
last part again? I missed it.
Well, you're the owner, so
Yeah.
does the owner have the ability to affirmatively support or decline any of the performance-enhancing activity that might take place in a race?
I think so. Definitely. They own the horse. They pay the bills. It comes down
Right,
to them.
But that's always after the fact. You're able as the owner to say, here are the rules that I want you to play by, and they are then respected by the trainer and the rest of the racing crew. Is that correct?
That's been my experience.
Okay, Mr.
Okay,
Hancock.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hancock would like to respond.
Yes, sir. I said to a top veterinarian in Kentucky about 3 years ago, I said, I don't want for my horses to have any kind of anything. And he said, well, Arthur, you want to win races, don't you? And that's the crux of the matter. We do have the authority to say no medication, but it's like getting in a fight with one hand tied behind your back. And we've got a lot at stake here.
All right, the chair thanks the gentleman from Texas who yields back, and I would like to thank our panelists for your testimony, for answering the questions. If we have follow-up questions that we send to you, could you please respond in writing, if you would? Thank you. At that point, then, we will dismiss panel 1 and call panel 2 to the witness table.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll recess for 3 minutes.
I'm naive.
That should be enough time. Jackson, thank you for your testimony.
For recess having expired, we'll ask our guests today to please take their seats. I'll ask panel 2 to please take their seats.
Dr. Ferraro is sitting in front of the microphone. Let's have you want to do a sound check. Excellent. They hear us fine. They see us fine.
Okay.
Yep, I think we need to get off the phone. We're not feedback. Okay. Thanks, Gene. Okay, bye.
Here we have the second panel.
Sure.
All right, if the panelists will take their seats, I'd like to thank all of them for agreeing to testify before the subcommittee today. Our second panel will include 4 witnesses, one by video conference from the state of California. First of all, Mr. Kenny McPeak, a horse trainer. Secondly, Dr. Catherine Papp, a veterinarian with a private practice. Thirdly, Mr. Glenn Thompson, a horse trainer. And finally, Dr. Gregory Ferraro, director of the Center for Equine Health at UC Davis and an associate director of the Large Animal Clinic at UC Davis. And I see him on the screen, so thank you all for coming. We have your prepared statements. Mr. McPeak, we'll begin with you, and you're recognized for your summary of your opening testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to testify on this important topic. I'm Kenny McPeak. As a thoroughbred trainer, I have nearly 8,000 starts and have won over 1,200 races in my career. I began my career at the lower levels as a claiming trainer, and until today have saddled over 120 stakes winners during a 27-year career. I never at any point have ever needed performance-enhancing drugs. I've never had a problem with so-called doping in my career. I have experience not only as a trainer, but as an agent and a farm owner, and I am fully vested in the horse industry, and its long-term prospects are my reasons for being here. My hope that this leads to a better version of this industry. Some refer to as a sport, others gambling, others as agriculture. It obviously is important in the number of jobs it offers this country, and it's important that it thrives in the long term. I do not believe that any major decisions about horse racing should be made without the involvement from professionals like myself. There are other trainers that need to be heard, and they should eventually be given an opportunity to contribute to this conversation. We are actually inside the arena. We deal with these issues on a daily basis. They're very complicated. It's not black and white. We all work very hard. We get up very early in the morning. We have to deal with not only horses, we deal with clients, we deal with a list of issues, whether it's business, labor laws, immigration laws. It's a very, very multitasking profession, training racehorses. My reasons for supporting a Horse Racing Improvement Act would include standardized rules, licensing, and medication. There are many issues that need to be addressed. I have concerns that the focus of the Interstate Horse Racing Act is too narrow in its agenda. There are currently solid testing practices and penalties that are enforced by state racing commissions. However, they vary between states. Doping seems to be the focus here, and it is important to address these acts, but they are very rare. The current testing systems measure medication overages in micrograms, nanograms, and picograms, and our current testing methods are the most controlled of any sport in the world. Most of the positives are minimal due to these extreme measurements, and I believe in many cases are due to poor stable management, metabolism rates in individual horses,
and possibly environmental factors, not necessarily or always cheating and doping. The rules being different in each state, and the states don't always clearly communicate their rules. Of course, enforcement of these medication rules is very important, and it would be wonderful to have uniform rules nationally. But how can we get 38 states to agree on one set of rules? I brought with me a book called World Rules on Equine Drug Testing and Therapeutic Medication Regulation. It was written by Dr. Tobin, Dr. Brewer, and Kent Sterling with the support of the National HBPA. It attempts to clarify the complicated issue of medication in our sport. It shows that horsemen's groups are interested in clarity in medication policies in American racing. The book lists 99 different therapeutic drugs, not performance-enhancing drugs. If my colleagues or I make one mistake, then we are considered a cheater or a doper. The book addresses zero tolerance policy, and I firmly believe that the involved parties aren't very far apart on these issues. My personal opinion is that I think we should make stakes races completely medication-free, including no Lasix. These stakes races are important because these horses are a significant part of the breeding programs, and their genetic influence is vital to strengthening the thoroughbred over a course of time. It also legitimizes our stallions and pedigrees to international buyers, which is good for the economics of the industry here in the United States. However, that being said, lower level claiming horses need a certain amount of therapeutic medication, and it would be a mistake to completely deny these horses in a limit of medication. When I say that, I'm saying there are horses that need Lasix. There are horses that do bleed. Now, for them to win a grade 1, that's one thing. But for those horses to be given what up to now is considered a therapeutic medication and Lasix would probably be a positive. I think you may need to narrow the limits or at least the how do you define a horse that actually needs it? And that's a very complicated topic. And how can a racing jurisdiction or even national policy address what horse actually needs that as a therapeutic medication? Now, I'm not condoning race day medication in an anti-inflammatory form. When I first started training, we used to be able to give butanbanamine the morning of the race. Now, in the course of probably the last, I can't remember if it's 10 or 12 years ago, they actually removed those race day drugs. And I thought that was a positive, and I do think it's had a positive effect. However, the nanogram, like for example, those of us that get up in the morning and take a Advil or a little Aleve to get through the day, that's one thing. Now, horse trainers have to decide if we give bute, we need to know out times, and so we don't miss the limits. Like if it's 5 nanograms, then we have to know, and that's what this book tries to address. Unfortunately, it's a lot of states and a lot of different medications, and for most horsemen, most trainers haven't read this book. Most of them don't have it. But even if you have it, it's very difficult to understand. Concerning breakdowns, medication overuse is not the sole cause of breakdowns. There are so many factors, including track surfaces. I'm not sure you'll completely eliminate the problem because injuries are unavoidable in all sports, not just horse racing. In the case of jockey safety, in some cases, jockeys are injured due to clipping heels, where other jockeys actually make a mistake in a race, cut them off, run them into the rail. So those types of issues are out of a trainer's control. And obviously there are suspensions often given by stewards, and that issue in itself is very complicated.
Could you please summarize? Your entire written testimony will be entered into the record, but if you could summarize, please.
To finish, in many parts of the racing are in place. However, they need organized structure on a national level to bring them together. Perhaps even an American Horse Racing Authority, where Congress mandates either the Jockey Club or the National Racing Compact to make licensing, rules, and medication decisions to bring the sport more structure and less confusion.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, gentlemen. And I'm sorry to have interrupted you, but we're pressing towards a 12 o'clock end time, so we'll ask everyone to maintain the 5-minute rule. Dr. Papp, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, good morning, and thank you to the committee for having me. I usually speak loud enough, but we'll try this. My name's Catherine Papp, and I'm a private veterinary practitioner with a practice currently based out of the Penn National Race Course in Grantville, PA. I've previously worked as a veterinarian at the Fair Hill Training Center, and I'm currently also doing regular work at the West Hampton Training Center in New Jersey and both Parks and Monmouth racetracks. Let me first begin by stating that I love and adore horses so much. They tirelessly give to us, even in spite of us, and our treatments of them. That is why I'm in this profession, to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. Having said that, I am not for or against federal regulation of racing at this time. I am for the welfare of the horse and the well-being of those who are riding. And those people who are riding are not just the jockeys, but the everyday exercise riders who are riding these horses during training hours. I am merely here today to state my observations as well as share my personal experiences and professional feelings on what is currently being conducted on the backside of many U.S. thoroughbred racetracks and what else needs to be addressed in order to ensure the well-being of both horse and rider. The overuse and abuse of medication is rampant at our thoroughbred racetracks and training centers. That abuse is not limited to just performance-enhancing drugs. It encompasses all substances that our trainers may think may improve their horse's performance, from valid treatments to hokey and possibly dangerous therapies. Medications that are currently being used that are overused at our racetracks include but are not limited to antibiotics, corticosteroids, NSAIDs, hormones and their analogs, calmative agents, hypersensitizing agents, and respiratory aids, amongst many others. These substances are not just being used inappropriately around race time. More commonly, they are employed during training and the time leading up to races. I cannot tell you how many barns I know that train every one of their horses on phenylbutazone every day, whether they need it or not. And bute alone has many adverse effects to consider, ranging from GI issues to renal issues. The issue does not just include active racing. As I said before, it's extremely important to address the medication use and rider safety during training hours. And this worry is compounded with the increased amount of races available at year-round tracks and increased purse sizes. These horses are more easily fatigued and thus require more medication to keep them going. The act of the forgotten horsemanship is at the crux of this problem. Training centers notoriously harbor trainers who overuse and abuse medications. Some of these trainers may have medicine cabinets that rival the inventory in my vet truck. And I know that I'm not the one prescribing these drugs. So where are they coming from? Internet pharmacies, other veterinarians, overseas? While the AAAP has done a fantastic job addressing the weaknesses inherent in the industry and designing recommendations for those practicing in the pari-mutuel environment, these are merely recommendations, and honestly, not every racetrack practitioner is even a member of the AAAP or respectfully regards any suggestions they may bring to the table. The mighty dollar is a driving force for many veterinarians and trainers involved in horse racing. I know a trainer whose vet was going through a barn one day administering race day medications. He had recently gotten a new expensive truck, and the trainer said to him, "How does it feel to be rich?" And the vet said, "Well, it sure doesn't suck." I also know racetrack veterinarians who own and market their own pharmacies for additional income, which is an inherent bias. I was present the other day when a trainer had entered a horse in a lower claiming race, and the horse had been winning high-level races for quite some time. And somebody went down and said, "Why did you enter this horse in such a low claiming race?" They said, "Well, this horse hasn't been going really well lately. We're just trying to get rid of him as soon as possible." And this is the case in many situations. My focus as a racetrack veterinarian is on preventative and diagnostic medicine and surgery. I do not provide race day medications, and for the most part, I'm not involved in the Lasix program unless filling in for a colleague. It is not uncommon for me to see on race day a practitioner enter a stall in one of the private barns or the detention barn with 3 to 10 syringes full of medication to administer and not be questioned by anyone. In the meantime, there is hardly any surveillance of horses that are permanently stabled on the racetrack, and trainer administrations of drugs is ubiquitous. Despite new regulations, horses are still having their joints injected with dexamethasone and other substances up until the day before a race. Not a week passes where I'm not asked by an individual on the track or at the training center about a new product or a new treatment that they have heard about to make their horses run better, and if I can obtain it for them. Of course, my regular clients already know better than to ask me how to cheat, and I am proud to say that one of my main trainers I work for has never incurred a positive test. Though many trainers who are using and penalized for positive tests, if suspended, continue to train, either unabashed at training centers or via associates at the racetracks. Pain is a protective mechanism in all animals, and it allows these athletes to protect and save themselves in certain circumstances. Horses, especially thoroughbreds, will under every circumstance do anything necessary to remain upright and not fall or injure their riders. However, this protective mechanism is nullified when doping occurs, and thus our riders and jockeys incur a significantly greater risk of injury or even death. A major encumbrance for the horse racing community is the lack of a central set of rules, published guidelines, and serious punishments. The rules regarding the allowed use of medication, including those on race day, change from state to state, and many trainers will be racing a number of horses in a number of different states within any given week. It is hard even for me to keep track of the withdrawal times and ever-changing medication rules amongst the different jurisdictions. In conclusion, we need central regulation of this sport, and I hope we can accomplish that amongst ourselves. However, action needs to be taken and completed quickly, deliberately, and efficiently if we are to save our industry before it destroys itself. Our horses are suffering because of our non-action. Our riders are suffering because of our non-action, and it is all of our faults. We need a collaborative effort to right the wrongs in today's racing environment. Most of all, we need a concerted effort to deter the overuse and abuse of drugs and a foolproof manner of which to enforce the rules and penalties set forth. I do believe we have come a long way since the last hearing in 2008, and strides have been made to improve the industry's image and the horses' welfare, though many of these changes are still theoretical and academic. What we really need to do now is to take these accomplishments made in committee meetings and hearings and directly apply them to the backside of America's racetrack.
Chair, thanks, gentlelady, and now recognizes Mr. Glenn Thompson for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Chairman Pitts, Mr. Whitfield, Mr. Gerlach, Mr. Meehan, and Heidi Sturr. I know you did a lot of work on this. I want to thank you. My name is Glenn Thompson. I want you to know it is a privilege to stand alongside you in this effort to clean up the great sport of racing. I've been a thoroughbred trainer for over 30 years. I have never had a positive drug test, and I've been blessed by the fact that I've never had to put a horse down on race day. I recently wrote a book, The Tradition of Cheating in the Sport of Kings, in an effort to return horsemanship and integrity back to the sport of racing. In the book, I claim that a vast majority of trainers and vets are giving illegal drugs on race day. Since my book came out in November, not one vet and not one trainer has stood up to challenge my claims. There's a culture of drugs that has taken over racing. Anyone that has chosen to train horses in the last 35 years would have a very difficult time avoiding the trap that we, and I include myself in this group, have fallen into. I do want to be clear. I do not give illegal drugs on race day. When I hold a trophy in the winner's circle, it's mine. I won the race. From the time you start your first hot walking job until you take out your trainer's license, you were taught if a horse has a problem, you do whatever it takes to get them healthy for the race. If there's an ankle problem, you give that horse Bute. If a horse bleeds, you give them Lasix. If a filly's in season, you give her a shot to take her out of season. Back before the use of drugs became so common, we had answers to these problems that did not require medication. Back in the day, we used horsemanship and patience and time to overcome our problems. But just like everything else in today's world, we fell into the trap of the quick fix. Thus, our horses and every aspect of racing has suffered. Lasix is the biggest hurdle we have to overcome in racing right now. This past winter, I went for surgery, and contrary to my friend's belief, it was not brain surgery. The doctor stressed that I was not to take any anti-inflammatories within a week of my surgery because it could cause bleeding. Thank God we banned anabolic steroids a couple of years ago, but we still routinely give corticosteroids to the horses very close to the race. One of the side effects for corticosteroids is bleeding. If you took a perfectly healthy horse with a strong set of lungs and gave it to a doctor and asked him to come up with drugs and a plan to make that horse bleed during a race, I would be willing to bet that a couple of his top choices in the drug department would be anti-inflammatories and steroids. The powers that be in racing, the people that we have trusted to make up the rules, have felt for the last 30 years that it's fine to give anti-inflammatories and steroids to horses 24 hours before they race, and then in their wisdom they scratch their heads and wonder why we have a bleeding problem. The plan that I think makes the most sense is to immediately ban Lasix and all other medications for 2-year-olds. If a 2-year-old needs drugs to race, they might be trying to tell us that they want to wait until they're 3 to race. The 2-year-olds that are not bleeding this year will hopefully be able to compete next year, and the 3-year-olds as 3-year-olds without bleeding. It would be a great accomplishment to have a Lasix-free Kentucky Derby in 2013 where none of the horses bleed. In 2014, Lasix is finished for all horses. By this time, I feel we have a better handle on bleeding, and hopefully some research can be done to help the older horses deal with the problems they will face. I highly recommend that the people that love horses and the people that do research dedicate a lot of time and energy into finding a better solution for the bleeding problem. Are we going to have horses bleed with this plan? Yes, we are. Is it going to be difficult? Yes, it is. But we're never going to know if we can climb this mountain if we just stand at the bottom and look up at it. I know some people are going to say, let's just ban it all now for all the horses, and you're tired of waiting for change, but I urge you to look out for the horses. To suddenly stop Lasix when a lot of damage has already been done to their lungs would be cruel, and I feel would see many horses possibly bleed to death on the track. This plan is a good one, and it will work, and most importantly, it looks out for the horses. Now we're going to make a little transition here to the poster boy of bad behavior in racing, Mr. Richard Dutrow. Mr. Dutrow has had a few violations over the years. Okay, so he's had 60 violations over the years. And the racing community wants to ban him from racing for 10 years. I want it known that if all the trainers in America, or the vast majority of trainers in America, had their actual records of what they treated their horses with on file on race day, the vast majority of trainers would all receive 10-year bans. They have just been a little smarter than Mr. Dutrow and not gotten themselves caught. I also want it known that Mr. Dutrow's breakdown record over the last few years, he's only had to put one horse down on race day in front of the crowd from his last 900 starters. Many other very prominent trainers have had to put several horses down on race day, several. My question to you, who's worse, the guy that has several rule violations or the guy that routinely has horses break down? I'm going to leave that with you guys to think about. It's a very, very complicated issue. I am, however, going to tell you who should receive a lifetime suspension, and that would be the people that are in charge of the integrity of our great sport. The Jockey Club, the NTRA, the Graded Stakes Committee, the stewards, and the track police are all complicit. They have all been ineffective in helping with the integrity and the drug issues we now face, but the main culprits are the State Racing Commission in the states across America. Their inability to come up with universal rules and their very lazy attempts at oversight, I feel, has led directly to the deaths of many horses and many horrific injuries to jockeys. I honestly feel that if the students in this school got together, they could do a better job. In closing, I want it understood that I did not enjoy writing my book. I struggled with doing it for years. I do not enjoy looking into some of my friends' eyes and seeing what I now see. I felt uneasy about coming to this hearing and testifying before you. But someone had to do it. Someone had to stand up for the horses, and it is my honor and privilege to do so.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Chair thanks the gentleman and now recognizes Dr. Ferraro by video conference. Welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Ferraro.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify. I'll paraphrase my statement. You have my written statement and try to be brief. My background is I was a racetrack practitioner for 27 years on Southern California Thoroughbred Racetrack. And since 1998, I've been the director of the Center for Equine Health at UC Davis. As part of that job, I am the liaison between all aspects of the horse industry and the School of Veterinary Medicine, which means I come in contact with the racing industry, with the sport horse industry, hunters, jumpers, dressage, cutters, reiners, pleasure horse, just about any type of horse there is. I also do a lot of work with humane groups, people that are concerned about the welfare of horses and who may not necessarily understand horses. I can tell you without a doubt that the general public, whether we believe medication is good or bad for the horse, whether we can make the distinction between therapeutic medication and doping, the general public cannot. And they're overwhelmingly against any kind of use of drugs in horse racing. And my general feeling about this is that if we continue to allow the use of drugs in horse racing of any kind on race day, any kind of positive testing, we will eventually lose our fan base and destroy the sport. So I think that this is a step that needs to be done. Based on my previous experience on the racetrack, I understand the opposition to not banning drugs such as Lasix and butazolidine. In fact, I was one of the original proponents of that when those drugs were originally allowed. It's only through the benefit of hindsight now that I can see that my arguments in proposing the use of Lasix and non-steroidals was incorrect. It has not served the industry well. It has not served the horses well. I understand why many people are afraid of banning them, but if you think about it, there's almost no trainers or veterinarians engaged in racing these days who ever practiced without the use of those drugs. So they firmly believe that they need them. I would argue that most of the rest of the modern racing world races without those permitted medications, and if they can do it, we can too. Finally, understanding the myriad of state and local controls over racing and the various interests from owners to trainers to racing jurisdictions, there is virtually no way that you're going to be able to get any kind of consistent rule to control these drugs without some kind of federal legislation. I just don't see it happening. And so while many of us feel that federal rules and regulations are something we want to keep out of our sport, I think in this instance there's just no way to manage this without it. In conclusion, I would say that as a member of the veterinary profession, it saddens me greatly that we haven't served the horse industry better than we have. I think we made a mistaken decision about 40 years ago to go down the path of permitted medication, and I think it's taken us in the wrong direction. Thank you very much.
Chair thanks the gentleman from California for joining us, and we will now proceed with questioning, and I will now begin the questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes for that purpose. Mr. McPeak, when horses go to the test barn, are test results accurate?
Well, as far as I know, they are. In the state of Kentucky, where I race primarily in New York, Kentucky, and Florida, I would assume that they would be. I honestly they don't show me a result.
Is it uniform from track to track or state to state?
State to state, it's not uniform, no. That's one of the things I was addressing in this book, is that it gives you, Butte in particular, there are at least 38 different states and several countries they address in here that have different types of testing. Like some of them are plasma, serum, others are urine, and the out times are different in nearly every state. It's a very difficult, it's a moving target for a horse trainer.
Are all trainers treated equally by track officials?
I've always been treated equally, yes.
Who enforces racing rules?
Well, the stewards, Kentucky Racing Commission in the case of Keeneland Churchill, where we run now, In New York, you've got the New York State Racing and Wagering Board, and of course, Florida, you've got, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they do a good job for the most part.
In your experience, are certain jurisdictions more lenient towards drugging?
I don't believe so, no. I believe they're all very serious about their jobs.
Dr. Papp, are race horses being over-medicated today?
Yes.
In your professional opinion, can therapeutic drugs mask other more dangerous drugs?
Yes.
Can steroids cause long-term damage to a horse?
Absolutely.
Explain.
Corticosteroids, I think, is what we're talking about here, the ones that are administered both parentally and intra-articularly.
Differentiate between the
Anabolic.
legitimate use of steroids and illegitimate.
Sure, there's a lot of legitimate uses. For example, when a horse has hives, when they have an allergic reaction, we use steroids to calm the immune response. What it's used for, horses that have inflammation in joints and other parts of their body, we will administer corticosteroids at a reasonable dose, at a reasonable time, with an appropriate diagnosis. So usually we're talking about injection into joints of corticosteroids. The downside of these are immune suppression is a huge one. Decreased bone density. We're seeing a lot of breakdowns, and directly related to corticosteroid use is decreased bone density. Increased chance of bleeding, as was mentioned before. And these corticosteroids can be administered at 24 hours out without being detected, at least in the state of Pennsylvania currently, and they are given in the vein, and it can mask pain and inflammation, absolutely.
Mr. Thompson, do some trainers use chemists to obtain compounded drugs that are particularly powerful and undetectable of current testing methods?
I would imagine they do. I don't have any firsthand knowledge about that, but I would imagine that they do.
Will industry groups like the Jockey Club and the NTRA make changes to medication rules voluntarily, in your opinion?
They don't have the power, but you know, I have no clue why these 36 states can't have a meeting and get together and sit down and get the job done. I mean, they should be able to have a meeting, call a meeting, get together, come up with universal rules. They have the power. The Jockey Club does not. The NTRA does not. The racing commissions do.
We continue to hear that no industry group has the authority needed to institute changes, and that every change is voluntary, that there's no uniformity among racing jurisdictions. Is, in your opinion, a federal regulatory framework the only realistic solution?
I hope not. I mean, I hope the racing commissions get together and have their meeting. And if they don't, then I hope you do come in and straighten it out.
Dr. Ferraro, the Racing Medication Testing Consortium has existed in one form or another for approximately 25 years. Is it an effective group with a well-understood mandate, and how effective is the group and the board that governs it?
I think the group is very effective in terms of improving the testing, monitoring testing, making recommendations on testing. Unfortunately, they really do not have any control over regulation.
Do you believe, Dr. Ferraro, that there should be a zero-tolerance policy for steroids in horse racing?
I think that there should be no drugs, detectable drugs in the horse's system at the time of racing.
Many people talk about the exercise-induced nosebleeds that are not uncommon in these horses, but state that they do not necessarily hurt the horse's performance. Does this condition damage the lungs, however? Is this bleeding the result of overworking the animal?
You know, there is a difference in bleeders. There's what they call a physiological bleeder. If you talk to people that are engaged in 100-mile races, humans, they will tell you they frequently taste blood just from the exercise induction of leakage across the capillary. But there are pathological bleeders. It's the veterinarian's job to separate the two and treat the pathological ones and leave the physiological bleeders alone. I believe, as others have stated here, that the non-steroidals and the other drugs we're giving are leading us down that path. Secondly, I think by continuing to treat these leading animals and give them the crutch that they need to continue racing, we're sending animals to the breeding shed that we probably shouldn't.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. My time's expired. I'll go now to the vice chairman, the gentleman in Texas, Dr. Burgess. Are you there?
I am here, Chairman. Thank you. for
All
the
right, you're recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Dr. Ferraro, let me ask you a question if I could. I mean, you referenced the designation of permissible race day medications some 40 years ago as perhaps the beginning of this problem. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. I testified on behalf of those drugs before racing commissions, before they were ever permitted.
Here's Chairman Whitfield delineated for us a list of stakeholders who might be opposed to a federal solution or federal legislation. And here's the difficulty I'm having. If there is the ability, either with the racing commissioners or within your professional organizations, to deal with this, just in my experience, you're so much better doing that than asking the United States Congress to get involved, because unfortunately, sometimes our involvement actually creates new and unforeseen problems. The law of unintended consequences is one that is alive and well in your United States Congress. So is there any possibility for putting the genie back in the bottle and rolling back the last 40 years and creating a structure within the industry itself where federal legislation would not be necessary?
I haven't seen it, and I can't see it coming. I agree with everything you said. That worries me considerably. But you had similar hearings to this 2 years ago where the industry promised you that they were going to do something about this, and they've basically done nothing. You have to understand the individual racing jurisdictions' viewpoint on this. If, for example, California decided that they weren't going to allow medication on their own, there's a very good possibility that most of their race trainers and race horses would move to another jurisdiction, thereby destroying the industry within their own state. So unless you have some kind of national rule that's instituted across the country at the same time, I don't see that any individual state or racing jurisdiction is going to do anything about it.
Except you referenced that the fan base wants this. They want the drugs out of the industry. So it seems to me if you had large jurisdictions like California, like Texas, maybe Kentucky joining in, that if they were together to say, we're having no more of this, then the rest of the country would fall in line. Is that just wishful thinking?
Unfortunately, I'm afraid it is. I mean, I wish it could be that way. If you look at our fan base in California, for example, it's eroding fairly rapidly. And I personally can go to other types of equine sporting events and see the fans and the owners that used to be in racing that have gone to other sports. And the simple reason is to get away from this drug culture.
Let me just ask you one last question. You talked about pathological and physiological bleeding. For those of us who are not knowledgeable of your field, a horse that has pathological bleeding, how is that likely to present?
Usually there's some damage to the lung that's identifiable by either ultrasound or radiographs. There's a consolidated lesion often. We have what we call a bleeder's lung. It's a pretty commonly accepted type of changes in the lung that we see. Those horses need rest and therapeutic medication, but not during the period of their training.
And what are the symptoms that they present with?
These horses bleed profusely. They bleed in the morning. They bleed galloping. They tend to degenerate over time in their performance. It's much different than most of the horses.
And is there a way to restrict a horse that is designated as a pathological bleeder from racing?
Not that I'm aware of.
So you simply medicate and put them back on the track?
Yeah, it's trainer and owner judgment on it, I believe.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the indulgence. I'll yield back my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you. Dr. Ferrara, you had indicated that you gave testimony to state racing authorities in which you advocated the use of Lasix and other drugs, and now you've changed your mind. Could you, in a very short period, explain to us primarily why you changed your mind?
Well, I give you the reason that I gave the commissioners when I argued for the medication. And in the case of the nonsteroidals, the argument was, well, if we can use the nonsteroidals in proximity to racing, we wouldn't have to inject as many joints with steroids, and we'd avoid that. That has proven not to be the case. In the case of Lasix, we knew at the time that when we argued for Lasix that it really wasn't a very good drug to control exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage. We knew that 40 years ago. What we argued was, give us this crutch, give us this drug that we can use now, and we'll find a better way to treat these animals. What in fact has happened is, because we have Lasix, we're not really moving down the line to find something better, to find a better solution. Bleeding in horses, exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage is a very complicated syndrome. There's a lot of things going on. It's not just the lung, it's also the heart, the buildup of pulmonary artery pressure. So there's a very complicated syndrome. I believe that the fact that we've had Lasix in racing has really slowed us down in trying to solve this problem. What I've seen when I look back now compared to the United States, compared to Britain, France, some of the other racing jurisdictions around the world, is that their racing has done much better than ours. If you look at their stallions, particularly the ones in Europe, they're much better than ours now. The offspring of these stallions are better race horses, and I believe we've done a detriment to the breed.
Thank you. Mr. McPeak, you held up that book just a few minutes ago, and someone had mentioned earlier that there were like 99 acceptable drugs with withdrawal, and I know that when state racing commissions get involved in trying to adopt these rules, the withdrawal times always creates confusion, and yet I was looking at the rules in Great Britain and some in Europe. They have like the 20 most commonly used drugs, and they set out very explicitly the withdrawal times, and anything else that's detected would not be allowed. It seems that it would be better for us to simply decrease the number of acceptable drugs that we set the withdrawal times for. Would that make sense to you?
Absolutely. You know, these are therapeutic drugs for the most part, but
Right.
and I brought several copies with me. There's a box full of them over there.
Okay.
If anyone would like to take those home, feel free. But it's very complicated, and we need
Yeah,
to narrow the focus. Instead of having a whole book, it would be nice if it was on one page. But
Yeah, it
the
is very
expectations of trainers is very
Right.
complicated.
It's very complicated, and you look around jurisdictions, and we know that Dr. Papp, her testimony was pretty dynamic. She was talking about rampant misuse and abuse, and very few trainers are ever suspended for any length of time because there's always legal suits, there's always the withdrawal times. That becomes a big legal issue. It's a morass. And this term layering, for example, have you ever heard of the term layering? Have you, Dr. Papp, heard of the layering? Okay. Well, I've been told that some people use this drug up to the limit, and alone they wouldn't have much impact, but together they can mask other agent stacking. That's the same. So I think that is pretty prevalent also. Would you say, Dr. Papp?
I've never heard of such a thing. I've never, I trust a veterinarian
Yeah.
to a limit.
Mhm.
I also try to keep them within, you have to rein them in. You have to say, okay, we're not going to let you do that because I don't think we need to do that.
Yeah.
But it's a balance.
I think there. I wish more trainers were like you, Mr. McPeak, but I get the idea that there are not a lot of them like you out there. But I know we have a lot of good trainers. Yeah, right. But Mr. Thompson, you mentioned that the ideal thing would be get these commissions together and come up with these rules. I don't want to see the federal government involved either. We're already involved in that we gave the ability to do simulcasting through the Interstate Horse Racing Act, and I think we can amend it and set guidelines and still have authority vested locally. But the problem with letting the racing commissions try to do this, I've heard time after time after time where the racing commission would make a decision, tighten up the rules, and then the HBPA or some other horsemen's group would go to the legislature and they would simply reverse it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
If these guys got together as a group and came up with rules, universal rules, nobody would be able to fight it. If they got together, 36 states, made a plan, and did it, that would be it.
And we've been waiting for that for a while.
Long time.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Now recognize the gentleman from Chester County, Mr. Gerlach, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Papp, in your testimony, and I'll quote here from just one line, the overuse and abuse of medication is rampant at our thoroughbred racetracks and training centers. In Pennsylvania, since primarily your testimony indicates you normally work out of Pennsylvania, maybe a little bit in New Jersey, what are the current Racing Commission obligations and responsibilities for a veterinarian to report abusive veterinarian practices with horses? What obligation professionally under the Racing Commission rules and regulations do you have to report that conduct?
As far as misconduct, there is no rule saying that one veterinarian has to report misconduct of another veterinarian, or you know, it's up to their discretion if they see a trainer abusing the medications. We have to produce day sheets for every medication and every treatment we do on each horse every day, whether it's on the honor system, whether or not the veterinarians put down what they actually give and do.
Has there been any discussion on that issue, do you know, in the racing commissions in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, about whether there ought to be mandatory requirements for reporting of abusive activities?
I read that they had recently talked about it at the Oklahoma meeting, however, not in Pennsylvania to my knowledge.
Okay. How about from the professional responsibility end? I know, for example, those that are in law have some ethical responsibilities to report misappropriate conduct by fellow attorneys, same thing perhaps in the medical profession. How about in the veterinarian profession? Are there rules of professional responsibility that the veterinary board here in Pennsylvania, and I'm pretty sure there's one in New Jersey as well, from a professional responsibility standpoint, what obligations might there be to report conduct that's not in the appropriate, that's inappropriate conduct for the handling of a horse, and at some point perhaps able to cause injury to both the horse and the rider at some point?
You are able to report it to your state board. However, there will be an investigation, and it basically comes down to proof, and that many times is difficult. And if you are unsuccessful with your proceeding forward with that, you can be basically shunned from the veterinary community.
Are you aware of any cases brought before the Professional Responsibility Organization here in Pennsylvania or in New Jersey of a veterinarian who has inappropriately conducted his or her practice with horses?
Actually, I just heard a few days ago that there's a young veterinarian in New Jersey that was treating standard bred horses. They had left an injectable vitamin with a trainer at the training center, and that trainer gave the medication and the horse died, and the veterinarian was basically put on the chopping block because of this, and that is the first time I've heard of that actually happening.
Great. Well, thank you for your testimony today. You'll back. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Recognize the gentleman from Delaware County, Mr. Meehan, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And once again, I want to thank this distinguished panel, particularly those of you who I know when you give this kind of testimony, you go back and talk to some of yours in the industry that may be looking and thinking, how come you're up here stepping out? But that is a question I have first. As trainers, if you aren't participating in the doping, aren't you at a competitive disadvantage? I mean, how do you put a horse out there? You said you didn't have a horse that went down, or you mentioned, I think your testimony. How can you compete in an industry like this if you're not doing the doping?
You gotta have a good horse.
I've spent an entire career finding good horses for people.
And the key is to, but you're still, you get a good horse, but you're still having somebody else is on that horse's tail in an inappropriate fashion. You still can beat them without the enhancement?
I don't believe that drugs make horses that much better in some cases. I think that in many cases, they have a negative response, even from the Lasix.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get a really good horse, I always said the first good horse in my career, which was Tahana Run, second in the Derby, I could have fed him rocks and Budweiser, and he was going to outrun most of them. He was that good. So,
the rocks of the Budweiser that created that.
Yeah. but he was that talented. And so I've spent my time going to horse auctions, Keeneland, Fasig-Tipton, and I've perfected my eye to find the best horses. I take those horses, I develop them slowly. We don't use hardly any medication. We don't treat young horses with bute. A lot of times we'll make several of our first starts without Lasix. I won stakes last year without Lasix at all.
But you, as a trainer, and that is, if you can find that, that's a wonderful advantage. But you're looking to try to win a race. When we're looking at this industry, in addition to the trying to win a particular race, I go back to this concern for the health and welfare of not just the animals but the jockeys themselves. So how does your jockey know that the other 8 or so horses out there aren't in a position to break a leg?
The best way I can explain it is that I get a large group of young horses every year, and a lot of them get claimed off of me. I have horses, and let's say I get 50 young horses. Out of the 50, 40 of them will be average, middle of the road, good solid horses that end up going to secondary circuits. Mr. Dutrow loves claiming off me, okay? But then the 10 horses are the ones that I'm after, and my clients ultimately, we want stake horses, and if we get those top horses out of the group, and that's very typical percentages, about 20% of your horses in a young crop are going to be good. But the definition of where they're going and how do they improve them when I lose them, and they're not getting improved.
No, but they're going out and they're racing at other tracks.
They're racing at other tracks.
Claims races and things of that nature.
They claim off me like crazy. They take horses off of me in Florida, Kentucky, New York. We're not seeing a dramatic improvement. So I'm not convinced that there's a huge issue with doping and all these issues that we're talking about here. The issue is that the rules are inconsistent and they vary state to state, and we need to get that straightened out, and it will eliminate the confusion.
You said there's not a huge issue with the doping, and I was struck by your testimony at the outset that you didn't think that there were other factors that could also contribute. But the New York Times articles lays out very clearly a pattern of increased injury associated with the advent of the use of the drugs and the significant growth in the drugs. Now, how do you describe the discrepancy then when presumably conditions are getting better?
I've read the articles. I've read them closely, and I'm trying to figure out which horses they're talking about. And it is the lower level horses they're discussing. One thing that I do, and this is a personal opinion again, I think winter racing is a very difficult time of year to be racing horses. They're running over frozen racetracks. In some cases, those tracks aren't maintained as well. And I'm not blaming New York Racing Association for that, but that's a fact. It's more difficult to handle those surfaces during difficult weather. But, the issues are complicated. I mean, can you blame the breakdowns that the New York Times is bringing up to strictly medication? It's hard to see how they could be clear on that, or for sure. I don't know.
Well, the case, and I looked at the article this morning. I'm having a chance to know all of the facts, but I'm taking on its basis that it was not just the doping that was associated with it, but it was putting a horse out there that had some injuries that they were aware of with regard to some injuries to the knee, in other words. And this was the word of one of the trainers. As you are undoubtedly aware, with an impaired ankle, this horse is a danger to himself, his rider, and everyone on any track where he's allowed to work and race. So let me ask you, we used the word earlier about reckless disregard. And I use that word as a term of art, as a former prosecutor. When somebody knows that a horse has a problem with a joint or an ankle, uses drugs and puts them out there, would you consider that to be reckless disregard for the for the welfare and concern of that jockey and any other who are racing on that track.
Well, I know these issues well. When you say an ankle, okay, has the horse had a P1 sagittal ridge removed? Does he have cartilage issues? Does he actually have a fracture that's in the base of the ankle? That's another deal. If a horse has a fracture in the base of the cannon bone that's causing inflammation and they've injected that joint, that is absolutely the wrong move. But a veterinarian would have x-rayed that if he was a good veterinarian, or a good trainer would have taken a picture, make sure that the ankle was
You're saying
that
good,
all the
but we're
parts.
talking about Dr. Papp's testimony where you have people walking in with vials of
I've never
of
seen
those.
that. I just maybe I'm naive, but you know the issue. If you're talking about whether it's an ankle or a knee, you've got so many different versions. Horses have ankle surgery, they have knee surgery, they have OCDs, osteochondrosis, which is a bone density issue. Those horses will have joint fluid, and they'll have, and the rules say that you're allowed to use certain medication at this point. And so the trainers that, even if they injected that particular ankle, what depth of knowledge did they have about the horse's issue? And if that depth of knowledge was solid, and that the veterinarian that they're working with have done their due diligence, then they didn't do anything wrong. However, that's what the rule systems are set up. That's how they're set up. And I, talking about joint issues, cortisone in joints, I think, is something in the long run we need to start addressing. When you put strictly cortisone in a joint, it in the long term deteriorates that joint. And we've had over the course, and I'm lucky, I've got clients that will pay for what we call hyaluronic acid, and it's actually a poor word, but it actually lubricates a joint, it increases the cartilage, it improves cartilage growth, and it's a positive, and then a very minimal amount of cortisone would follow that, or in some cases none at all. So how we deal with those physical issues it's a very, very complicated, it's not black and white.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know my time's expired, and I know you're trying to. Dr. Papp, do you have a last observation? You're a veterinarian.
Yeah, just a quick observation is that I agree with you on the corticosteroid issue. However, I see trainers, lower level claiming trainers that are just scraping to get by that will not pay for an x-ray. So you're talking about good trainers that will do their due diligence. However, I offer x-rays in almost all of these situations, and the trainers very frequently respond, I'll just put some poultice on it, see how it looks tomorrow. If it doesn't look as bad, I'm going to keep going. And that's how it is.
That would be the owner that didn't want to pay for the x-ray.
Or a lot of the trainers are the owners.
Mr. Pitts, could I?
Yes,
could I
Mr.
have 1
Thompson,
second?
you have the last word.
All right, I would like to ask our future fans, the students, or did they leave?
They
just
walked out. They have a 12
I wanted to
o'clock.
see if any of them were coming to the races next week.
With that, I'll ask the witnesses, if we have follow-up questions, will you please respond in writing? Thank you very much for your testimony, for the answers. This has been a very informative hearing. Again, I want to thank Unionville High School for the use of your state-of-the-art facilities. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the members and the witnesses for your testimony. At this time, I would request unanimous consent to insert a statement from Senator Udall and a statement from Dr. Scott Palmer for the record. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to respond to the question promptly. Members should submit their questions by the close of business on Monday, May 14th. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.
That's why I do.
Thank you.
I know. And bone losing is so rampant, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ed.